ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು.
ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದಾ? ಹಾಂ, ಅವರು ತಿರ್ಗಾ ಬರಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಹಾಕಿದ್ದಾರೆ ನೋಡಿ ರವಿ.
ಸರ್ ಲೈವಲ್ಲಿ ಇದೆ, ಮಾಡಿ ಸರ್.
ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು.
ओम नमो ब्रह्मादिभ्यो ब्रह्मविद्या संप्रदाय कर्तृभ्यो वंशर्षिभ्यो नमो महद्भ्यो. Namaste. Very good morning to everybody. I will quickly recapitulate yesterday's discussion. Yesterday we saw that the schools of Vedanta that existed prior to Shankaracharya and Badarayana all held the view that there is no ultimate distinction between Jiva and Brahman in the state of Mukti. Jiva Brahmaikya is a central proclamation of the Upanishads and the Vedanta Darshana. The later schools of Vishishtadvaita and Dvaita, which emerged after Shankara, rejected the idea of Jiva Brahmaikya and instead asserted that there is a fundamental distinction between the individual self and the ultimate reality. What we saw yesterday is that these schools have no direct antecedents in the pre-Shankara Vedantic tradition, and their emergence represents a significant departure from the earlier Vedantic consensus. So yesterday we established that the Vedanta Darshana as it existed prior to Shankara and Badarayana was characterized by a consensus of Jiva Brahmaikya and the idea that liberation is attained through the knowledge or realization of that unity. Today we will discuss Shaankarasampradaya Nirnayaha, an investigation into the holy tradition, the Sampradaya of Shankaracharya's teachings. In continuation with our previous discussion, today we shall delve into the specific teachings of the Vedantic teachers that were accepted and advanced by Shankaracharya in his commentaries. While Shankaracharya critiques many opposing views and arguments, he also extensively elaborates on the teachings of his lineage and its predecessors. We must realize that all that Shankaracharya wrote, only a part of his was original contribution, and that part is also not very original indeed. And this is not a defect. भगवत्पादैरभ्युपगतो वेदांत प्रक्रिया विशेषो न तत् उपज्ञः किन्तु तत् प्रागपि लब्धप्रसर आसीत् इत्यत्र प्रस्थानत्रय भाष्येषु तेषामेवोद्घोषणात् अवगम्यते. In this chapter, Swami tries to establish that Shankaracharya was not the progenitor of his school. The tradition existed prior to him. Swami writes that it is unequivocally evident that Shankaracharya is not a founder of Advaita Vedanta as taught by him, and this is established without doubt, beyond doubt, by Shankaracharya's explicit remarks in his commentaries on the Prasthanatrayam. So very clearly, very firmly, he belonged to a very ancient tradition, a very ancient sampradaya of Advaita Vedanta. A most important name of this tradition, of this sampradaya, is of course GAUDAPADA Acharya. Very little is known of this great Acharya. Like most classical Indian thinkers, he lives in our memories only through his work. His philosophy is his biography. According to tradition, he is Shankaracharya's Paramaguru. Shankaracharya directly refers to him as such in his Karika Bhashya. In the Madhaviya Shankara Vijaya, Gaudapada Acharya is said to be a disciple of Shuka, the son of Bhagavan Vyasa, and the guru of Govinda Bhagavatpada, the guru of Shankaracharya. In Shankara Bhashya on Shvetashvataropanishad, there is a reference to Gaudapada Acharya as the disciple of Shukamuni. Tathacha Shukashishyo Gaudapada Acharya. This is the phrase. Anandagiri, in his Tika on the Mandukya Karika Bhashya, he writes that Gaudapada Acharya meditated in Badrikashrama on Narayana, and Narayana revealed to him the great Upanishadic wisdom. Shri Gaudapada Acharyasya Narayana Prasadataha Pratipannan Mandukyopanishadarthan. Then there is Balakrishnananda Saraswati in his Shariraka Mimamsa Bhashyavartika. He writes that in Kurukshetra, on the banks of river Hiraravati, there lived a jati, a tribe called the Gaudas, and the preeminent of them was Gaudapada. His true name is unknown to us. He is celebrated by Jati Namnaiva Prasiddhaha. He writes, Gaudacharanaha Kurukshetra Deshagata Hiraravati Naditira Bhava Gaudajati Shreshtaha Desha Vishesha Bhava Jati Namnaiva Prasiddhaha Dvapara Yugam Arabhyaiva Samadhi Nishthatvena Adhunikair Janaihi Aparijñata Visheshabhidhanaha Samanya Namnaiva Lokavikhyataha. Of course, these are not historical records. I'm just pointing to the available literature for your reference only. Shankaracharya does not explicitly mention the name Gaudapada anywhere. Yet, in his Brahma Sutra Bhashya, he quotes the Karika directly, verbatim, and refers to the author of the said Karikas as Sampradaya. And it should be noted that he always uses the honorific plural. Sampradaya vido vadanti, Vedantartha Sampradaya vidbhir acharyaihi. The honorific plural, which is a mark of veneration, it clearly demonstrates Shankaracharya's deep veneration for him. Sureshwaracharya, on the other hand, clearly mentions his name 3 times, Gaudacharya or Gaudapada, in his Brihadaranyaka Bhashyavartika. He quotes 2 Karikas in his Naishkarmya Siddhi, clearly cites them as Gaudapadacharyas. What is established beyond doubt is that the Sutra Bhashya of Shankaracharya reflects, upholds, and follows the teachings of the Gaudapada Sampradaya. Swami writes, ShaankaraprakriyABhAskaraha Sarini. His only work or only known work is the Mandukya Karika, also known by the names Gaudapada or Gaudapadiya Karika. It is an exposition of a short but important Upanishad called the Mandukya Upanishad. This Upanishad is counted as one of the principal Upanishads by all the schools of Vedanta. The Muktika Upanishad says that for the liberation of those who desire moksha, the Mandukya alone is enough. Mandukya mekamevalam mumukshunam vimuktaye. Gaudapada's work is not a commentary on the Mandukya in the usual sense of the term. It is a karika, not a bhashya. The karikas are memorial verses whose purpose is to expound in a metrical form an aspect of a subject or a particular doctrine so it is also easy to memorize it. Their object is the same as that of sutras, but while the sutras are in prose and aim at condensation to the extremist degree, omitting all the unnecessary words, even those required by syntax, the karikas are not so brief or cryptic. The sutras necessarily have to be short because they have to cover an entire system also. The karikas ordinarily expound an aspect of a subject. We know all this. The karikas consist of 4 prakaranas. They are named Agama Prakarana, Vaitatya Prakarana, Advaita Prakarana, and Aladashatya Prakarana, containing 29, 38, 48, and 100 verses respectively. It is only in the first chapter that the mantras of the Mandukya Upanishad are occur, they are expounded. The other 3 prakaranas follow the lead of the Upanishad and seek to establish the Advaita doctrine, adopting different methods or modes of reasoning. The first prakarana, significantly called Agama, is a commentary in verse on the Upanishad, which consists of 12 prose passages. The prakarana itself contains 29 karikas, and each set of karikas introduced with the words Atraite Shloka Bhavanti. Interestingly, the non-Advaitins claim that the Mandukya Upanishad covers not only the 12 mantras, but also the 29 Karikas. According to Madhvacharya and his followers Vyasatirtha and Srinivasa, both the prose passages and the Karikas of the first Prakarana were handed down by Varuna in the form of a Manduka, the frog. So the Rishi of the Upanishad is Varuna, the Devata is Narayana, and Madhva quotes as his authorities the Padma Purana, the Harivamsha, Garuda Purana, to show that Varuna in the form of a frog saw the Shruti through the grace of Narayana and added the mantras seen by those others, seen by Brahma, with the words Atraite Shloka Bhavanti. Ramanuja quotes in his commentary on the Vedanta Sutra 1.1.1 a Karika of the first Prakarana as Shruti, along with the passage from Shvetashvatara. So, as against this contention, Shankaracharya and Sureshwaracharya have referred to the Karikas of the first Prakarana and stated that they are the utterances of Gaudapada Acharya. There are a lot of discussions regarding this text. We will sidestep it for now. Gaudapada Acharya himself refers to previous teachers of the school. गौडपादाचार्यापि स्वीयकारिकासु पातं प्रक्रियाविशेषं प्राचीनसम्प्रदायानुसारीत्येव मन्यन्ते स्म इत्यत्रापि ज्ञापकं विद्यते. Gaudapadacharya's allusion to the esteemed educators of his Advaita Vedanta lineage suggests a profound historical depth to the transmission of his teachings. It is inferred that the doctrines expounded by Gaudapadacharya were part of a continuous lineage of Advaita Vedanta gurus, the teachers who preceded him. And the existence of such an illustrious lineage of Advaita Vedanta masters reinforces the philosophical tradition's relevance and significance. In his Karikas, he says, Swapna Jagarita Sthane Hekamahur Manishanaha. The Manishanaha, the wise ones say that the states of dream and waking are identical. Swapnamaye yatha drishte gandharvanagaram yatha tatha vishwamidam drishtam vedanteshu vichakshanaihi. As the word vedanteshu vichakshanaihi, this suggests the Purvacharyas of the tradition. Another, Vitaraga Bhayakrodhair Munibhir Veda Paragaihi Nirvikalpo Yayam Drishtaha Prapanchopashamodvaya. The Atman is declared to be free from all the thought constructs, free from all differentiation by those who have crossed to the other shore of the Vedas. They're free from attachment, fear, and wrath. So it is evident that Gaudapadacharya cannot be credited as the originator of Advaita, nor did he resort to borrowing from Buddhism, as he is often accused. We will see this in detail on the last day. But there is no necessity for him to have borrowed principle from Buddhism. After all, what is the need to resort to Buddhism when there exists an extensive succession of instructors transmitting these identical teachings? That there was a lineage of teachers who conveyed the same concepts prior to his time is firmly established. This celebrated lineage of teachers is unambiguous from his own works. We'll dwell on this in more detail on the last day also. Now, Shankaracharya also demonstrates great reverence for the Sampradaya. In his commentaries, he often refers to the views of earlier philosophers and interpreters of the Vedas, acknowledging their place in the tradition and his own as one teacher in a long line of teachers. Swami writes, Na kevalam Gaudapadacharyaha swasampradaya vitvena pramanikrita bhashyakarena yavat sviya bhashyeshu sarvatrapi तत्र तत्र सत्संप्रदाये परमादरः प्रकटितोऽस्ति सत्संप्रदायविदामेव सुवेद्यो वेदान्तार्थः इति स्वाशयाविष्करणाय गुरुशिष्यपरम्परया आगत एव हि वेदान्तोपदेशो याथार्थ्येन वेदान्तानां तात्पर्यम् अनुभवपर्यन्तताम् आपादयितुं शक्नोति. Shankaracharya's Bhashya is imbued with the deep reverence for the ancient tradition that he so faithfully followed. In his writings, he repeatedly emphasizes the paramount importance of seeking out the guidance of a guru in order to attain this highest knowledge. He repeatedly emphasizes that even those who possess an encyclopedic understanding of the scriptural texts should not attempt to seek the knowledge of Brahman on their own. This is a clear testament to the high regard in which he holds the Guru Shishya Parampara, the lineage of the Sampradaya. For Shankara, the knowledge of Atman can only be conveyed through the traditional method of the Agama. The term refers to the teachings passed down through a succession of teachers, which alone have the power to convey the essence of the sacred texts in a manner that can be intuited directly. In the Gita Bhashya, he says, Asampradaya vit sarvashastra vidapi murkhavadeva upekshaniyaha. Yesterday, we scrutinized the scholars whom he offered criticism towards. So today, our inquiry will delve into the teachers who are aligned with the same philosophical stance as that of Shankaracharya. Of course, almost nothing is known of the actual circumstances of the Vedanta school prior to the composition of the Brahma Sutra. And the state of affairs for a period of at least 400-500 years from the composition of Brahma Sutra to the appearance of Shankaracharya is also very unclear. It's in fact called as the Dark Ages in Indological circles because of the absolute lack of any knowledge of it. Of the writings of the Vedanta school during this period, the only extant text is the Mandukya Karika. In addition to this, there must have been an enormous number of other writings turned out in this period. But unfortunately, all of them is now lost, not come down to us. But as it happens, a few of the doctrines, sayings of these pre-Shankara thinkers are mentioned or noted in the works of the later schools. Combining all these together, we can know at least 14 thinkers. It is not no idamitham here, tentative list of 14 thinkers who perhaps lived between the time of composition of the Brahma Sutra and Shankaracharya. Of the list, we have already discussed Bhartra Prapancha. So today we will discuss Upavarshaacharya, Brahmanandi, and Dravidacharya. We will first begin with Upavarshaacharya. Upavarshaacharya is acknowledged to be the earliest and also the most authoritative of the thinkers of Vedanta and the Mimamsa schools after the Brahma Sutra. He is said to have written commentaries on both the Mimamsa Sutra and the Brahma Sutra. Also, in the Tantra Chudamani by Krishna Deva, it is noted that Upavarsha wrote a vritti on the Mimamsa Sutra. And according to a later work called Prapancha Hridaya, Upavarsha is said to have written commentaries not only on the two sutras but also on the Sankarshana Kanda, traditionally recognized as a work by Jaimini. He seems to have regarded these three works as constituting Mimamsa learning in the widest sense, paid great attention to their correlation, unification. According to Prapancha Hridaya, his commentary works were brief, concisely written. It is likely that among the many commentaries on the Brahma Sutra, the one by Upavarsha was the most famous. In addition, tradition has it that Upavarsha wrote sutras on the Dharma Sutras. It is not clear whether this is the same Upavarshaacharya. All of his works are now lost. Only fragments have been passed down to us. Details of Upavarshaacharya's life is completely unknown. We come across this name in the Kathasarit Sagara. Here we learn of a Brahmana called Shankaraswamin who had two sons, the older son called Varsha and the younger called Upavarsha. It also mentions that Upavarsha had a daughter named Upakosha. R.G. Bhandarkar has argued that since he is listed in a work alongside famous figures like Katyayana, Vyadhi, Panini, etc., he must himself have been an important historical figure. But even if we admit this, it is highly questionable whether or not these descriptions do in fact give us the truth. The only thing that we can know for sure is that he wrote a commentary on the Brahma Sutra, so he must have been later than that. And since he was called Bhagavan by the Vrittikara Bodhayana, he must be earlier than Bodhayana. So maybe dated, we're not sure of the dating, maybe 450, 500 CE. He's mentioned twice in Shankaracharya's Brahma Sutra Bhashya. The first instance occurs in the commentary of the sutra, Eka Atmanaha Sharire Bhavat. Shankaracharya writes, Iha Deha Vyatiriktasya Atmanaha Sadbhavaha Samarthyate Bandha Mokshadhikara Siddhaye. Nahi Asati Deha Vyatirikta Atmani Paraloka Phalashchodana Upapadyeran. Kasyava Brahmatmatvam Upadishyeta. The sutra says, now since it is established that the Atman is bound and liberated, it is proved that the Atman actually exists distinct from the physical body. If the Atman was not distinct from the body, then the karma kanda, the phala that is declared by the Veda, would have no basis. Moreover, if it were so, for whom would be taught the doctrine of the Upanishads that Brahman is Atman? Nanu Shastra Pramukha Eva Prathame Pade Shastra Phalopabhoga Yogyasya Deha Vyatiriktasya Atmanostitvam Uktam. So there is an objection. Has the existence of a self that is different from the body not already been stated at the very beginning of the Shastra, the first pada? Satyamuktam Bhashyakrata. Here this actually refers to the Jaimini Sutras, not the Brahma Sutras. Satyamuktam Bhashyakrata Natu Tatratmastitvam Tatratmastitve Sutramasti. That is true. It has been stated by the author of the Bhashya, that is Shabaraswamin. But there is no sutra about the existence of such a self. The Bhashya is there, the sutra is not there. Ihatu Swayameva Sutrakrita Tadastitvam Akshepa Purahsaram Pratishthapitam. But here, in this sutra, on the other hand, the existence of the self has been established after an initial objection by the author of the sutra himself, the sutrakara himself. Ita eva cha akrishya acharyena Shabaraswamina pramana lakshane varnitam ata eva cha bhagavata upavarshena prathame tantre atmastitvabhidhana prasakto sharirake vakshyama ityuddhara. Here, as per Shankaracharya's assertion, the notion of the existence of the self as a separate entity from the body is not articulated in the Jaimini Sutras. It is posited by Shabaraswamin, the Bhashyakara, in his Bhashya. And Shankaracharya writes that Shabaraswamin adopted this idea from the Uttara Mimamsa. He then cites Upavarshaacharya, who indicated that the self will be expounded in the Shariraka. Ata eva Bhagavata Upavarshena Prathame Tantre Atmastitva Vidhana Prasakto Sharirake Vakshyamaha Ittara Kritaha. This indicates that Upavarshaacharya had written a vritti on both the Purva Mimamsa and the Shariraka. He was presumably an ancient teacher who predated Shabaraswamin. Note that Shankaracharya uses the honorific Bhagavan, Bhagavata Upavarshena. Clearly, Shankaracharya held him in great respect. Another sutra, Shabda iti chennatah prabhavat pratyakshanumanabhyam. In this passage, the debate is about the nature of Shabda. The sutra states that the entire world arises from Shabda. What then is the nature of such Shabda is the inquiry in the Bhashya. Kimatmakam punaha Shabdam. Having raised this question, Shankaracharya first states the doctrine of Spota, argues against it, and cites the revered Upavarshaacharya, who says, Varna eva tu Shabdaha iti Bhagavan Upavarshaha. The words are none other than the Varnas, the various letter sounds. From this extract, we learn that Upavarshaacharya is quoted as saying that the words are nothing other than the various letter sounds, which is in contrast to the theory of Spota put forth by the advocates of that doctrine. Upavarshaacharya's statement suggests that he holds a more conventional view of language. The words are composed of individual sounds or letters. In Shankaracharya's commentary on this sutra, after citing the words of Upavarshaacharya, he gives an elaborate discussion between the Spotavadin and the opponent. Here, only the statement Varna eva tu shabdaha. This is all that comes from Upavarsha. And the refutation for Spotavada is supplied by Shankaracharya. The various subcommentators also remark that in this passage, he is declaring the established teaching of his own line based on the tradition of the masters. So the words of Upavarshaacharya is understood as the tradition of the masters. In Shankara's commentary on the Brahma Sutra, it is only in these two passages that Upavarshaacharya is referred to. In both occasions, Shankaracharya approves his doctrines and adds the honorific title Bhagavan. Interestingly, Bhaskaracharya, who also wrote a commentary on the Brahma Sutra, mentions Upavarshaacharya 3 times. Now, fate has been very unkind to the works of Bhaskaracharya. Only his commentary on the Brahma Sutra and fragments of his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita have been preserved. Of the former, there exists only one measurable edition. The latter awaits publication. Neither work has been translated. Bhaskaracharya was well known by 850 CE and so must have been a contemporary of Shankaracharya. Perhaps he was actually so, as tradition asserts. There can be no doubt that Bhaskaracharya had read or perhaps heard of Shankaracharya's work on the Brahma Sutra, because his refutations of it follow Shankaracharya's arguments point by point. On the other hand, there is no such specific evidence to show that Shankaracharya knew Bhaskaracharya. Despite this, Shankaracharya seems to have been well acquainted with the philosophical views that are found in Bhaskaracharya's works. In the various passages scattered through Shankaracharya's works, these views are condemned and refuted. So Bhaskaracharya, though he may be slightly later than Shankara, represents a pre-Shankara school of Vedanta philosophy. Now, if a Vedanti is capable of hatred, Bhaskaracharya must have truly hated Shankaracharya's philosophy. In one place, after quoting Shankaracharya, he says, "No one but a man in his drunkenness could put forth such an argument." And after describing Shankaracharya's concept of mukti, he says, some of us would rather be jackals in a forest than have your kind of mukti. So no love lost for Shankaracharya. We find perfect agreement between the two commentaries in most places, but only specific questions arise. There is vast or very great divergence. In Bhaskaracharya's citations of Upavarshaacharya, there are minor differences, but what he says is substantially the same as the account that we find in Shankaracharya. He also adds the honorific title of revered teacher, that is Bhagavat, when he refers to him. Furthermore, he quotes his tradition as the tradition from Upavarshagama. Accordingly, we can conclude that Upavarshaacharya was looked upon as an authority by all the branches of Vedanta school generally. In the Purva Mimamsa school also, he was respected as a great authority. He's called a Vrittikara. He has written a commentary on the Mimamsa Sutra by and there is an extract found in Shabarastaman. These are the general details. But Vedanta Deshika of Vishishtadvaita equates Upavarshaacharya with Bodhayana, the Vrittikara on whose authority Ramanujacharya relies in his Shri Bhashya. The later Mimamsa scholars also regard the Vrittikara and Upavarsha as one and the same. And when Shankaracharya briefly quotes Upavarshaacharya in his Brahma Sutra Bhashya, his subcommentators Anandajnana and Govindananda call Upavarsha as the Vrittikara. In spite of this, we cannot identify them. Upavarshaacharya is nowhere seen as having been identified with Bodhayana by Shabadaswamin or Shankaracharya or any other ancient writer up to Ramanujacharya has never referred to Bodhayana as a Vedantin. Indeed, it is highly doubtful whether Ramanujacharya himself had seen the Bodhayana Vritti as a complete work. His opening statements in his Shri Bhashya, when he says Bhagavad Bodhayana Kritam Vistirnam Brahmasutra Vrittim Purvacharyaha Sanchikripuhu Tanmatanusarena Sutraksharani Vyakhyasyante. So it seems to imply that he was following only the abridged version of the Vritti. It is significant that even from this abridgment, he has been able to adduce very few citations. There's a story about this particular vritti. According to this, Ramanujacharya traveled all the way to Kashmir, where he got permission to have just one look at the only copy of the vritti that was available there. He is said to have been able to cite the extracts with the assistance of his disciple who had an extraordinary memory. Add to this circumstance that Mahacharya Vishishtadvaitan himself considered Upavarsha and Bodhayana as two different writers. Prapancha Hridaya also clearly regards the two as distinct. It is not clear why they later came to be regarded as identical, but perhaps because Upavarshaacharya wrote two commentaries on the Mimamsa Sutra, which might have been called Vritti, came to be lost, unknown in later centuries, and he simply came to be regarded as the Vrittikara. But this supposed identity of Bodhayana and Upavarsha holds no grounds. This Swami establishes very clearly. The next is Atreya Brahmanandin and Dravidacharya. These two personages are among the early expounders of the pure Advaitic tradition. Brahmanandi is sometimes called Atreya, descendant of the lineage of Atri. More widely, he is called Vakyakara. It is said that he wrote a work called Vakya in sutra form, which is an exposition of the purport or essence of Chandogya Upanishad. It is said that Dravidacharya embellished that work by writing his Bhashya on it. On account of this, these authors came to be known as Vakyakara and Bhashyakara, respectively. There is some discrepancy in the account given of this Dravida Bhashya by Madhusudana Saraswati and Anandagiri. While Anandagiri says that Dravidacharya wrote an extensive commentary on the Chandogya itself, Madhusudana writes the Bhashya was on the Vakya that Brahmanandi wrote, the sutras of Brahmanandi. Unfortunately, these two works are not available. However, 30 statements of the Vakya, 20 of the Bhashya are available, having been quoted in the works of early writers. Of these, 8 statements of Vakya Grantha, 9 of the Bhashya are found in the Advaitic works. Let us first look at Dravidacharya. Now, Sri Ramanujacharya also quotes Dravidacharya as an authority figure in his works. According to Yamunacharya Siddhitraya, Dravida is listed as the earliest who commented correctly on the Brahma Sutras. There still exists a copper plate regarding the donation in the year 1478 of the Shaka calendar by King Sadashivaraya of Vijayanagara of several villages to a temple where an image of Ramanuja was being installed. In this eulogy, his tradition is linked with that of Dravidacharya. Prapedushe Vedamarga Pratishtitacharya Varyatam Tadrigveda Shikhasara Dramidagama Vedine ShuddaShAnkaraprakriyABhAskaraha Siddhanta Sthapanacharya Moolaye Mayavadi Manogarva Bhedine Jitavadine Ramanuja Munindraya. It goes on like that. A lot of academic research is dedicated towards understanding if Ramanujacharya's Dravidacharya is the same as the one quoted as a Vedantin in the works of Shankaracharya. In the Advaitic works, the Bhashya of Dravidacharya is cited in the context of Madhuvidya Samvarga Vidya of the third, fourth chapters of Chandogya Upanishad. Ramanuja, on the other hand, quotes it in a different context, the Antaraditya Vidya of the first chapter of Chandogya Upanishad. Shankaracharya particularly uses Dravidacharya or Dravida. Ramanuja calls Dramida or Dramidacharya. It is now very clear that these two were two distinct persons, not the same, very clearly demonstrated by Swamiji in this chapter. Swami shows that the Dravidacharya quoted by Shankaracharya was a firm Vedantin who upheld the Shuddha Sampradaya. Shankaracharya cites an Akhyayika in the Brihadaranyaka Bhashya. He says, Atra cha sampradayavada akhyayikam samprachakshate. Kaschit kila rajaputro jatamatra eva. Mata pitrabhyam apavidho vyadhagrihe samvardhitaha. A certain prince who happened to be separated from his parents at the very time of his birth was brought up in a hunter's cottage. So mushyavamshyatam ajanan vyadha jati pratyayo vyadha jati karmanyeva vartate na raja smeti raja jati karmanya vartate. Not knowing his parentage and believing that he belonged to the hunter's caste, he took to the habits natural to a born hunter. Yada punaha kaschit paramakaruniko rajaputrasya rajashri prapti yogyatam janan amushyaputratam bodhayati natvam vyadho amushya rajnyah putraha kaschit vyadha graham anupravishtaha iti. So when some highly compassionate person, conscious of the prince's, or how to say this, prince's, the attainment of a kingdom, he draws his attention to his lineage, disillusions him about the false notion by telling him how he appeared to enter the hunter's cottage and was brought up there while being the son of such and such a king. Sa evam bodhitaha tyaktva vyadhajadipatya karmani pitrapaitamahim padavim anuvartate rajaham asmiti. He at once gave up his belief that he was born a hunter and abandoning the habits and actions fit for a born hunter, he adapts himself to his own status, that of a Kshatriya, that of a Rajaputra. In a similar manner, the Jiva, separated from the Supreme Self, is like the spark that has left the fire, having entered in, this is the bhasha that follows of Shankaracharya, having entered into the deep forest of the aggregate of the body and the senses, he takes on the characteristics of the body and the senses, befitting the transmigratory soul. And unaware of his really being the Supreme Self, fancies himself to be the aggregate of the body and the senses, either lean or fat, happy or miserable. And when awakened by the Acharya, and taught that he is not of this nature, but really the highest Brahman, transcending all life's misery, he abandons running after the desires and is confirmed in the knowledge of his being Brahman. This story is very famous, is very often quoted in almost every pravachana. But this sublime anecdote that reveals or unveils the perils of misidentification and elucidates the liberating essence of self-realization, this is credited to that Dramidacharya. Shankaracharya himself does not quote the name or cite the name, but Anandagiri is who endorses or credits this story to Dramidacharya. Here Swami makes a remark. Atrodahito Dravidacharyo Ramanujabhashye paramrishtat Dramidacharyaat abhinnaha iti bhrantaha kechit yathoktakhyayika nirvisheshatmavadimate na sambhavati ityap akshipanti. Some confound the Dravidacharya with the Dramidacharya referred to in Ramanuja's Bhashya and raise the objection that the story narrated here does not really fit in with the doctrine of Advaita. They interpret the story itself differently. They interpret the passage differently. They say, Nahi Rajnyaha tat putrasya chaikyam kasyachit sammatam. Nava Rajnyaha sthiti dashayam tat putrasya asamarthasya rajyam sambhavati. Rajya sambhavepi dharma eva pratipannah syat nato jiva brahma abheda pratipattihi sambhavati. Here they argue that the king and his son are not identical. Rajnyaha tat putrasya aikyam na kasyachit sammatam. Sambhavepe dharma eva pratipannah syat. At best, it only illustrates the likeness of the individual self to the Supreme Self, not complete non-difference. Abheda is not the teaching, is the objection raised. This criticism is altogether out of place because the story is meant only to disabuse the prince's mind of the wrong notion that he is a hunter's son, to draw his attention to the fact that he is the son of so and so was really the royal heir apparent. Rajaputrasya Rajashri Prapti Yogyatam Jananna Mushyaputratam Bodhayati. So the objection is unfounded. Besides this, we have a direct reference to the ancient Dravidacharya in Shankaracharya's Karika Bhashya, which serves as a clincher here. Shankaracharya writes, Tasmat Nirvishesha evatmani Sukhitpadayo Visheshaha Kalpitaha Yattu Asukhitpadi Shastramatmanaha Tat Sukhitpadi Vishesha Nivrityarthameveti Siddham tu Nivartakatvat Ityagama Vidam Sutram. Characteristics like being happy are only constructs of imagination in the Atman, who is altogether free from all specific features. Niravisheshamevatmanaha sukhitpadayo visheshaha kalpitaha. The Shastra, which describes the self as not happy, etc., that is only to negate happiness and other attributes. Hence, Agamavidam Sutram, Siddham tu Nivartakatvat. The Anandagiri's gloss on this sentence, Siddham tu Nivartakatvat, he says that it is an appeal to the approval of Dravidacharya. Ukterthe Dravidacharya sammatim aha siddham tu iti. Surely Ramanujacharya's Dramida could never make such a palpably Advaitic statement. There's another beautiful story that is possibly ascribed to Dravidacharya in the Aitareya. Shankaracharya quotes, Atrakhyaika machakrate kaschit kila manushyo mugdhaha kaishchiduktaha kasminshchid aparadhe sati dhikvam nasi manushyaha iti. Samugdhataya atmano manushyatvam pratyayitum kanchit upetya aha bravitu bhavan kohamasmiti. Sa tasya mugdhatam jnatva aha kramena bodhayishyami iti. Once a gullible, naive man committed a crime and was chastised, you are not human. Dhikvam nasi manushya iti. Believing this to be the literal truth, he approached another man and asked him, what then am I? The other man, perceiving his naivete, taught him slowly, step by step, that he was not non-human. Satam muktaha, sthavaradhyatmam, sthavaradhyatma bhavam apohya natvam amanushyaha ityuktva upararama. He taught him that he is not non-human. Satam muktaha pratyaha bhavan mam bodhayitum pravuttaha tushnim babhova kim na bodhayati. When asked, why are you not teaching me further? He replies, Nasi amanushyaha ityuktepi manushyatvam atmano na pratipadyate yaha स कथं मनुष्योऽसि इत्युक्तोऽपि मनुष्यत्वम् आत्मनः प्रतिपद्येत. He who cannot understand that he is human when told you are not non-human cannot comprehend it even if told you are human. This is a very, very important story, aptly demonstrates the crux of Shankaracharya's argument that direct instructions are ineffective in the context of mistaken identities. This story is also credited to Dravidacharya as a censure that Shankaracharya respected him as an authority figure of the Sampradaya. We will now look into Brahmanandi. Brahmanandi was also called Atrivamshya, Atreya, Vakyakara. We find several references to him in Sarvajñatman's Samkshepa Shariraka. I'll read out a couple of the extracts that we have here. Atreya Vakyamape Samvyavaharatram Karyam Samastam iti Naha Kathayam Babhuva Satkaryavada Vishaye Nahi Dosharashir Mayamaye Bhavitum Utsahate Virodhat. There's a saying of Atreya, the Samvyavaharatram Karyam Samastam iti. Everything exists as effect, the karya, and this is merely empirically existent. Samvyavahara matram. This position deflects the many defects involved in the doctrine of the Satkaryavada, which does not apply in this particular case. Kanada darshana samashraya dosharashihi duran nirasta iha samvyavahara matre Vedanta bhumi kushalo munir atrivamshya tenaha karyam iha samvyavahara matram. In the theory of its being merely empirical existence, the many faults inherent in the Vaisheshika system of philosophy is also removed. The Satkaryavada faults are also removed, the defects of Asatkaryavada are also removed. In this Vedanta teaching, the world as effect is merely empirical existence. This Samvyavahara Matram is a repeatedly used phrase in the context of Brahmanandi, which effectively establishes that he regarded all effect, all karya, as for practical purposes only from the empirical point of view. And after having considered the common sense view of cause and effect, and Satkaryavada, Asatkaryavada, he is said to have given it up in favor of the theory of illusory causation, more proximate to the Advaita, very similar to Shankaracharya's position. The next fragment also, Shashta Prapathaka Nibaddham Udiritam Yat Tat Satyameva Khalu Satyamashrayatvat Atraiva Yat Punaruvacha Samudraphena Drishtanta Purvakam Adu Vyavahara Drishtya. What has been taught in relation to part 6 of the Chandogya Upanishad is the truth concerned with being, but what is taught in the saying of Atreya is based on the familiar analogy of the ocean and the foam in it, and this is the answer to the objection that the theory of parinama is taught here. There is an objection that the theory of parinama is taught here, but here we see that the Brahmanandin is refuting that position, and what is called the empirical view, the Vyavahara Drishti, is basically the doctrine of Adhyaropa and Apavada. This theory of Adhyaropa and Apavada, the method of, I can't call it theory, but the method of Adhyaropa and Apavada has been very clearly established by Brahmanandi, clearly states that he belongs to the lineage of, or the Sampradaya of Shankaracharya. In every fragment, we see the two standpoints being adopted, the Samvyavahara Matram, that keyword shows that the two standpoint is adopted, the Adhyaropapavada method is adopted, very, very clearly establishes Brahmanandin in the Sampradaya of Shankaracharya. The next fragment, Purvam Vikaram Upavarnya, Shanaihe Tad Drishtim Visrijya, Nikatam Parigrihya, Tasmat Sarvam Vikaram Atha Samvyavahara Matram Advaitameva Parirakshati Vakyakaraha. This is very clear reference to Adhyaropapavada. The author, having first described the doctrine of transformation, gradually having abandoned this view, takes one up close to it. That is the theory of false superimposition. Maintains non duality alone. All transformation is merely empirical existence. Very, very clearly, the method of Adhyaropapavada. Another very clear reference to this method is Madhusudana's commentary on this. He says, Na asataha utpattihi anishpadyatvat napi sataha pravatyanarthakyat satya visheshat abhivaktyarthamiti chet na tasyapi satvat pravatti nityatvacha sadabhivyakti prasangaha na samvyavahara matratvat. This samvyavahara matratvat is a repeatedly used phrase in the citations of Brahmanandi. It is very clear that Brahmanandi holds that Brahman is the only reality, that everything in the phenomenal world is only empirically real, samvyavahara matra. Therefore, from the standpoint of absolute truth, it must be said that all things are non-dual. The relationship between Brahman and the phenomenal world is likened to the ocean and foam, but again, this is only a provisional teaching presented in order to lead the inquirers to the Vedanta philosophy. His true teaching, true intention is Advaita. But according to Bhaskaracharya, Brahmanandi does not teach that the phenomenal world is illusory. He says, Sutrakaraha, Shrutyamakari, Parinama Paksham Sutrayam Babhova. Ayameva chandogye vakyakara vrittikarabhyam sampradayamataha samashritaha tathacha vakyam parinamasto syate tadhyadivat iti. So according to him, the author of following the revealed scriptures presented in the sutras, the evolution theory is presented. So in commenting on the Chandogya Upanishad, both the Vakyakara and the Vrittikara followed this view based on the tradition as it is adopted. The evolution theory is Bhaskaracharya's proposition. So he says the evolution of things is like the appearance of milk turning into curd. According to Ramanuja, Brahmanandin held that each of the individual selves corresponds to the body of Brahman. He uses this to bolster his own metaphysical points. Swami writes that in either case, it is impossible to escape the conclusion that the Vakyakara and the Bhashyakara cannot be identified with their namesakes Vakyakara Tanka and Bhashyakara Dramida, to whom Ramanuja appeals. For the name Tanka was quite unknown to Vedantins before Yamunacharya, the grand preceptor of Ramanuja, and the word Dramida never occurs as a variant of Dravida either in Advaitic or Vishishtadvaitic works. We are thus forced to suspend our judgment with regard to the identification of Tanka and Brahmanandin, as well as that of Dramida and Dravida, until we find any voucher in the Vedantic works for such identification. These two pairs had best be kept apart as different authorities supporting the different doctrines of two distinct and mutually exclusive schools of Vedanta. It can be deduced from the extensive discourse of Swamis in the two sections that the Advaita school of thought, which posits the non-dualistic nature of reality, was universally acknowledged as the sole representative of the Upanishadic teachings during the period of Shankara and before his time. There are no allusions in the philosophical literature of the time to the existence of other schools such as Dvaita and Vishishtadvaita or any other doctrine. Within the Advaita tradition, there were varying views regarding the ontology of Brahman's nature, the attainment of liberation through certain practices prescribed in the scriptures. Additionally, there existed divergent opinions concerning the relationship between Brahman and the manifest world, the means to attain liberation, etc., etc. Although Shankaracharya's Sampradaya shared the Advaitic perspective with the other traditions, it stood apart from them by adopting a unique methodology in explicating the Vedantic principles. Of course, this unique methodology is not really unique or truly unique, that Shankaracharya himself did not originate this approach, but rather it has been passed down through a long line of venerable teachers belonging to this tradition. Let me read out Swami's words here. The conclusion of this chapter, he says, तदेवमन्तं प्रतानितया किरणद्वयगतचिन्तया इदम् एकं सुनिष्पन्नं यद् अद्वैतमेव सर्वैर्वेदान्तैः प्रतिपिपादयिषितो राद्धान्तः द्वैतविशिष्टाद्वैतादिवादिनस्तु नैवासन् शङ्करभाष्यप्रणयनसमये ततः प्राग्वा इति। यद्यपि प्राचीनाद्वैतिनः सर्वेपि जीवब्रह्मैक्यं नियमेनानुमेनिरे, तथापि तेष्वेव केचित् जैवं रूपं पारमार्थिकं मन्यमाना यत्किञ्चित् साधनायत्तम् एव जीवस्य परमात्मना ऐक्यम् इति मतम् आस्थिताः। एवं जगद्ब्रह्मणोः सम्बन्धविषये मोक्ष साधनविशेषविषये च ते बहुधा विप्रतिपन्ना आसन् इति भगवत्पादीय भाष्यानूदित विविध वृत्तिकार मत समालोचनात् अवगम्यते। श्री शंकर भगवत्पादैः अपि इतर वृत्तिकारैरिव अद्वैतमेव वेदान्तार्थम् अभ्युपागमि। अनितर साधारण प्रक्रिया विशेषस्यैव वेदांत सम्मतत्वेन स्वीकरणात् तु तेषां प्रस्थानं सकलेतर विलक्षणम् अभूत्। सा च प्रक्रिया न तैर् अभिनवम् उपज्ञाता, किन्तु अनादिकाल प्रवृत्त संप्रदायागतैवेति श्री गौडपाद द्रविड ब्रह्मानंद्यादि प्राचीनाचार्य प्रमाण वाक्योपलम्भात् अवगम्यते। तैरेव च वाक्यैः कतिभिश्चित् अत्रोदाहृतैः दिङ्मात्रं तस्य प्रक्रियाविशेषस्य निश्चेतुं शक्नुवन्त्येव सूक्ष्ममतयः। यथा च सैवैका श्रुतियुक्त्यनुभवसङ्गानेन वेदान्तार्थं गमयन्ति साम्प्रतम् अपि विजयते, तथा समनन्तरोत्तरकिरणे दर्शयिष्यत इति सर्वं शिवम्. We will look into what is this prakriya that distinguishes Shankaracharya's matam in the following lectures, in the following chapters. Swami brings out very beautifully the Vishesha Prakriya that makes this Sampradaya stand out. We will look into that tomorrow and the day after. Thank you for today. I will close with this.